Excited to have you with me. I hope you had a great Memorial Day weekend. We went to the mountains, just me, the kids, my wife, the dog. We had fun. I went fly fishing. It was only the second time I've ever gone fly fishing. The first time by myself, and I actually, for the first time, caught a fish. I caught a trout in the Chattahoochee near Helen, Georgia. And I've always wondered, because it's been years since I went fishing, what would I do when I caught the fish? Would I scream for my wife to come take it off the hook? Would I make Philip drive 4 hours to come rescue the fish? Nope. I did it myself. I did not have to revoke my man card. And I enjoyed it. I took the boy. We went fly fishing in the Chattahoochee, had the waders on and all. I'm sure you cared. Now, we must move on to the news of the day. And the big story of today: Texas Democrats have walked out of the Texas legislature at the end of the state legislative session. Now, in Texas, they only meet every other year. The entire world should do like Texas. The legislature meets every other year for, I think, 180 days, something like that. Well, the Democrats have walked out of the Texas legislature to stop a voting reform bill. You will note there has been very little coverage of the legislation until the bitter end, and now there is national wall-to-wall media coverage of it. The DNC chairman, failed candidate for Senate Jamie Harrison, is on all over the news shows, along with a number of state legislators from Texas. Stacey Abrams, by the way, nowhere to be seen. Here's the DNC chair.
All of those things are really, really important so that we allow the American people to make the decision on who they want to represent them. Let's not curb that. It's so sad to see these same Republicans who, you remember back when we went into Iraq, they were on the floor of the House of Representatives and they were applauding those moments where the Iraqis dipped their fingers in that purple paint and said, "Oh, look at how America allowed this democracy to thrive once again." Well, hell, why are we doing everything that we can in this country to take away the right to vote of American citizens? But that's what's on the Republicans. This is not about integrity. This is about them keeping political power, and I'd be damned, we will not allow them to do that.
Now, that's one. Here's one more. I'm also getting text messages as I'm talking from people listening in Texas about this. I have some inside scoop. One more from Harrison, though.
This Texas bill is so bad. It is probably the worst of all of these bills that we're seeing, from Georgia to Arizona to Florida. This bill lowers the threshold for courts to throw out elections. It allows the political goons to come to Black and brown communities to intimidate them while they're voting. It goes after souls to the polls. This is the most blatant attempt to really curb Black and brown voting that I've seen in my lifetime.
Now, pay attention to the souls to polls line. Souls to the polls is where during early voting, if there's a Sunday for early voting, Black pastors and Black congregations will encourage their parishioners, their congregants, to leave and go together en masse to the polls to vote. This happens in Georgia. They were attacked, of course, in Georgia for this. It turned out not to be true. The legislation actually allows a Sunday of voting, but it was completely mischaracterized by the national media. But this is interesting because in Loudoun County, Virginia, there is a pastor and his congregation are under fire because the pastor called on his congregants to sign petitions to challenge members of the local school board for engaging in what he called emotional child abuse due to some of the issues of the school system there. And the Democrats in Virginia and nationally the Democratic Party want to revoke the tax-exempt status for this church in Virginia for the pastor daring to sound political. And yet the chairman of the Democratic National Committee is defending souls to the polls, where pastors get their congregants to go vote on a Sunday, the Lord's Day. Naturally, the national media is praising them for doing this. After defeating restrictive voting bill, Texas Democrats send loud message: we need Congress to do their part. This is all about H.R. 1. The coordinated walkout just after 10:30 p.m. Central Time jolted the national debate on voting rights, putting the spotlight on Democratic-backed federal legislation that has stalled in the Senate all spring, even as state Republicans move to enact new voting rules. Oh, wait, what? Wait, say that. Wait a second. We knew today, with the eye of the nation watching action in Austin, that we needed to send a message, said Representative Trey Martinez Fisher, a San Antonio Democrat, said at a news conference held at a historically black church in Austin. You mean the Democrats were politicking at a church? So only white evangelicals are prohibited from doing that, apparently. You know, I've got a couple of messages from people in Texas who pay attention to, follow, or are in the legislature, and they tell me a couple of things. One, there will be a special session, but Greg Abbott cannot call it until after June 20th because there's a 20-day period for him to decide to sign or veto legislation, after which a special session can be called. Abbott is now signaling he will call for a special session. Abbott also apparently didn't get a lot of his initiatives passed through the legislature, so he is vetoing the provision in the budget for legislator pay. And he's also telling them behind the scenes he won't allow them to bring up the voting rights measure unless they pass some of his initiatives for the special session. I'm also told by people in and around the legislature, including a couple of elected officials, this was a blessing in disguise in Texas because the Republicans packed several things in that arguably could get the whole thing thrown out by federal judges, and that this gets them on the same page. There have been some level of division, and this will be useful to get them on the same page. Now, from the larger picture, though, we're seeing this coordinated effort between the Democrats and the media trying to do this. You could tell that the media was coordinating with the Democrats in how they just flooded the zone with coverage over the weekend. Now, what's so notable is that they're blasting Republicans in Washington for using the filibuster and obstructing in Washington. But they're praising the Democrats in Texas for walking out of the legislature and prohibiting democracy from continuing. This is actually really good for the GOP because it highlights the growing disconnect between the political press and reality. It shows how partisan the political press is. It shows, in fact, just how the media will take whatever side the Democrats are on and make it the positive side of the story. The national political press now makes the Democrats the protagonist in all of these voting stories. Look at what happened in Georgia. In Georgia, they passed a fairly reasonable measure that was grossly mischaracterized by the national press, including the claim that they were prohibiting people from getting food and water within 100 feet of the polls, which is not true. The legislation provides for water and food within 100 feet. You just can't be a non-voter or non-poll worker. Now, in fairness, food is questionable, but water, 100%, the legislation allows for water within 100 feet of the polling location. It just can't be served by activists. By the way, outside of 100 feet of the polls, you can have a food truck and a bar and grill if you want, but the media never bothered to cover that as well. Everything is designed to make the Republicans look bad. Now, there's a related story in Georgia about the Georgia bill. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution has a story. Georgia absentee ID law has outsized impact on black and metro voters. Now, here's what you've got to understand. In Georgia, like many states, it is a requirement that if you're going to vote, you've got to have a photo ID. There's a loophole in the law in that if you go by absentee voting, you don't have to have a photo ID. Instead, they do a signature match to your driver's license or voter registration card. And now the AJC is saying over 272,000 registered voters don't have a driver's license or state ID on file with election officials, meaning they'd have to submit additional documents to vote by mail under Georgia's new law. The ID requirements disproportionately affect black voters who are much less likely than white voters to have ID numbers matched to their voter registration, according to Election Day. Now, pay attention to this sleight of hand. The ID requirements directly affect black voters who are much less likely than white voters to have ID numbers matched to their voter registrations, according to election data. Nope. What? Courtney Brown, a South Fulton absentee voter listed by the state among those who don't have an ID, said she's been registered for 21 years and renewed her driver's license. So she does have an ID. Nope. Sabrina Payne Bland, a retired educator from Alpharetta, said she has an ID, but it might not be showing up in election records because of her hyphenated last. So she's got one. There you got two. Nope. We got an entire story here, and they can't seem to find anyone who doesn't have a photo ID. You've got an entire story in the AJC. The premise, again, from the beginning, the ID requirements disproportionately affect black voters who are much less likely than white voters to have ID numbers matched to their voter registrations. Over 272,000 registered voters don't have a driver's license or state ID on file. So there are, according to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, 272,000 registered voters who are registered but don't have a photo ID, and they could not find a single damn one of them to go on record. Wow. You got two people, both of whom are identified as having driver's licenses. That's not really the compelling story I guess they thought it was. Huh? Maybe. Manufacturing outrage where there really is none. By the way, according to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, over 65% of black voters support photo ID requirements for absentee ballots.
Want to be on the show? Call Eric now at 877-97.